You can tell a lot about a game from its opening moments. It's a point in your story all viewers are going to see regardless of their skill level or investment, so it's important to provide them with something engaging yet approachable. Some games get this right, with clever tutorials, a smart amount of writing, and something unique that'll catch your attention right off the bat. Other games might have a drag of an intro of overly long cutscenes, confusing tutorials, and worn story beats. In the worst case scenario, it might even scare people away from an otherwise phenomenal game. The intro to a game is a tricky thing to get right, and today I would like to talk about a particular intro from a game I enjoyed quite a bit and that I've always found to be quite underrated. That game is Golden Sun. If you've never heard of this title before, Golden Sun is a top-down sprite-based JRPG for the Game Boy Advance. It's a game a lot of people grew up with, especially the younger crowd who were born a little too late to grow up with the likes of Chrono Trigger or the early Final Fantasy games. Or at least that's what it was like to me. The story of Golden Sun is about 4 elemental stars that when thrown into their respective lighthouses will destroy the world, at least if this floating rock is to be believed. You play as Isaac, a young boy and his 3 friends who chase around the small group of fire mages in an attempt to stop them from igniting these lighthouses. It's pretty run-of-the-mill and inoffensive for this sort of game. In spite of that, though, it gets the job done pretty well, and is written extremely well for all things considered. In fact, what I would like to argue today is that particularly the intro to Golden Sun is not only very well written, but it's in fact one of the best constructed openings I've ever seen in a JRPG. That said, let's jump right in. Here are the very first few seconds of the game. I'd like to now take a second to talk about cliches. Now, this may seem a little bit off topic, but bear with me here. A cliche is defined as a phrase or opinion that is overused and betrays a lack of original thought. That's kind of a blunt description in my opinion, but the reason why I bring this up is because if there's one genre of video games that's notorious for its cliches, it's the JRPG. Because, you know, a lot of them just happen to be set in medieval ages, or star a teenager with only one parent, or have a legend about so many ancient MacGuffins that you will no doubt need to collect. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with cliches, the JRPG in general is so notorious about them that there is an infamous website that lists off nearly 200 of them. Take your favorite RPG and run it through this list sometime, it's a lot of fun. But something important about this list is that the literal first thing that is listed is this. Number 1, the Sleepyhead Rule. The teenaged male lead will begin the first day of the game by oversleeping, being woken up by his mother, and being reminded that he slept in so late he missed meeting his girlfriend. And yeah, at least the waking up part is an extremely common way to start a story, even outside of the JRPG. Now, one reason why cliches can be fun is that one thing people love to do is subvert those cliches, if even by a little. Given those very 2 opening lines, you probably expect the hero of the story to be woken up to just another peaceful day in his hometown. Now, let's see some more of this scene. Well, that's different. So apparently Golden Sun is going for somewhat of a more exciting intro. The kind of intro where the hero's hometown, city, slum, or planet will usually be annihilated in a spectacular fashion before the end of the game, and often before the end of the opening scene. Which coincidentally just happens to be the second cliche on that big list I just mentioned. You know, I might as well talk about this now so I don't come off as a broken record later, but Golden Sun is one of those games that's not afraid to follow cliches of its own genre. In fact, I ran through that big list and counted each time I recognized something that the Golden Sun duology just happened to do. Of the number of cliches on this site, Golden Sun just happened to feature 88 of them. That's nearly half. And while a lot of people might chalk that up to lazy story writing, I don't know, something about how Golden Sun presents itself makes it all come off as somewhat self-aware. Like the team behind this game was more so paying homage to in an introductory sort of way, rather than being lazy. That's a weird way to word it, so let me explain it like this. Do you remember Star Wars 7? People like that movie, but a common complaint people had with it was that it played itself very safe by repeating a lot of the story beats from the very first Star Wars back in '77. Thinking about it though, that was probably intentional. Star Wars 7 was the first major film in the franchise since Disney bought it, and because they probably didn't want to completely alienate their audience with the first outing, the company likely thought it was a good idea to fall back on something familiar, something inoffensive that everyone from new fans to series veterans will enjoy. Golden Sun is kind of like the Star Wars 7 of its genre. The company behind this game has worked on JRPGs in the past, specifically the Shining Force games. However, this was their first RPG developed under Nintendo, and for a system aimed at a younger audience as well. In other words, Golden Sun was probably a lot of people's first exposure to the genre. And that's why, while Golden Sun may follow a lot of JRPG cliches, I never really find myself disliking the game because of them. In fact, I actually have more respect, as Camelot Software Planning clearly wanted to make this game the best it could be in spite of that. That and this is a fantastic introduction to the genre for kids whose first system was the GBA. We're starting to get a bit off topic though. I mean, we're not even a minute into the game yet, so you know what, let's play a little more of that intro. However, as I do, I would like you to keep the word world building in mind. Did you see that? I know I'm interrupting this a lot, but this game really just does that good of a job of packing so much information into the first few seconds of the game. This magical hand Isaac's mother just summoned is a form of magic. Now, at this point I think it's worth knowing that Golden Sun is a series that's notorious for its puzzles. Specifically, it's puzzles that require the use of your magical abilities. What just happened is cool for a couple reasons. First off, it tells the player that magic in the world of Golden Sun isn't just an ends to a mean. It's not something to be exclusively used in battle. In fact, several times throughout this series, you can see magic used in more practical means. It's good world building. And secondly, it's somewhat of a tutorial as well. This magic you see here is a skill called Catch, and it's a skill you yourself get pretty early on. This one moment teaches you all this, and in a story context that makes sense as well. And the last thing I'd like to touch on before we leave this room are these. These yes-no answer prompts may seem super mundane at first, mainly because, you know, what game doesn't have a yes-no option, but Golden Sun has a reason for these to exist. Isaac is a mute protagonist, which once again is another pretty big video game cliche. However, once again, Golden Sun seems somehow self-aware of this. This might sound a little crazy, but Isaac, to me at least, comes off as someone who is actually mute. It isn't just like this for the sake of following a cliche. I think it has something to do with how other characters act around him. Have you ever noticed how a lot of the times during cutscenes, characters will face Isaac and then this yes-no prompt will come up, almost as if they're asking him for his opinion on this situation. But no, he can't answer outside of shaking or nodding his head. This moment lets you in on this and introduces this yes-no mechanic as well. So much information, and we haven't even left Isaac's bedroom yet. Now, let's run a little more into this intro. This is when we start to actually get into the main conflict of this scene. You know, I'll give this game extra credit for something a lot of RPGs don't do. They actually give names to both of Isaac's parents. So the main conflict of this intro is about this giant boulder that is falling from an erupting mountain at the top of the village. Isaac's mother asks him to escape to the plaza where he will be safe, while her and Isaac's father run off to help evacuate other villagers. They tell you to run south, and here's where honestly my least favorite thing about this intro comes up. These boulders, I'm not a fan of them. I get the point of why they exist, but I always found them to be a bit lazy, because the only purpose they serve is to railroad you into a detour. This happens not once, not twice, but occasionally thrice over the course of the intro. They take you out of the immersion a bit, but regardless, the boulder in this scenario forces you to head north, where you meet a new character. This is Garrett, your childhood friend as well as the barbarian brute-like character of the game. There's a short scene where they introduce him and then he joins the party for the rest of the game. After that, you head north again and happen to witness quite a scene. The giant boulder has started to fall, and you see a number of priests and villagers using their magic in an attempt to keep it up. You've got to appreciate that they actually show you the threat so directly, especially since the game just told you about it. I also love that they bring up the concept that magic can run out in this universe. One of these villagers sees you and tells you to keep pressing on. A little farther down the path, you meet up with this guy. I like this guy. He was attacked by some monster and asks you if you think he's going to die. Say no, and hey, he's fine. Subtle foreshadowing that everything's going to be alright. He warns you that monsters have started appearing in the village, however, which is a good segue into battles. The first few battles in Golden Sun take the tutorial approach of giving you few options to play around with, to the point in which you really can't lose this unless you go out of your way to try. Fun fact about the encounters in this intro, they're actually scripted, which means that every time you play this game, you'll always run into these encounters at the same points. This was likely intentional to let you know that yes, this game does have random encounters, however never enough that it's actually annoying. One other thing I love about this part is that after you defeat this first monster, the music changes to this. Up until this point, the music has just been rain and thunder sound effects, but now yet another new threat has been introduced in the form of these monsters. The game starts playing something a lot more hopeless and solemn as a result. I don't think this track appears that often in the game, and it really sets the correct tone. Farther down we find another scene, and meet with a few new characters, notably Jenna, this young girl, and her brother Felix, who is in a dire predicament. They need someone with magic to save him, so Jenna runs down to the plaza and her mother asks you to go help her. So now you're somewhat involved in helping the villagers as well. You have a responsibility aside from just getting to safety now, and that's cool. Eventually you do make it to the plaza. At this point you meet this strong man in front of a purple crystal. Here we see another great example of world building. This purple crystal is something called a synergy stone. Its function is that it infinitely restores your magic, and this NPC is using it for the same purpose as well. You, Jenna, and the strong man run back up to save Felix. However, just as you're about to reach him, tragedy strikes. I get goosebumps every time I watch that. Everyone is gone, including the boy you did all this for, and all that's left are people frozen in fear over what just happened. Isaac himself stands in place. You can actually move him at this point, but the game doesn't tell you this, allowing you enough time to take in what just happened before moving on. The only thing you can do at this point is leave and look for help. It's never that simple, though. As you enter the next screen, you overhear two sinister characters, a man and a woman who talk as if they had something to do with a disaster that just transpired. These two decide to attack you in an attempt to keep you quiet after they suspect that you've been listening in on their conversation. This is the first boss of the game. Yep, this is one of those fights that's impossible to win. You know, these sorts of things are pretty common in RPGs as well, and people seem to dislike them for some reason, but I don't know. I've always felt they were a really creative way to show that a character that's way more powerful than you is actually way more powerful than you. I especially love it when later in that game you fight that encounter again, and by that time you are actually powerful enough to defeat them. This is one of those scenarios. And that's the intro to Golden Sun. Frankly, I've always been a fan of it. It sets up everything you need to know and then some in only about 15 minutes. Considering some games can take upwards of hours to get a move on, I find this one to be quite impressive in a number of different ways. I've always been one of those diversity of thoughts kind of guys though, so to get a second opinion on this, I actually went to the Golden Sun subreddit, because, you know, everything has a subreddit. I asked what people thought of the intro, and here are some responses. I like it, but it's very long. The first time wasn't a problem, but on the second, third, and fourth run through, it became a bit of an inconvenience. It means the game isn't pick up and play at first. You have to set aside 30 to 45 minutes to get started. Wait, 30 to 45 minutes? I thought the intro was— It's your typical expositional intro, with a downside of not being skippable on replay. What I like is the lack of obvious tutorials, prior to Flint at least. The characters are all clearly established, including some of the faceless ones. There is also clearly some backstory that we aren't immediately given, especially regarding Satoru's and Minardi. It's a bit drawn out with long dialogue scenes like the rest of the game, but it contains necessary story elements that build into strong and relatable motivations for the main characters. Losing your parents in an event that can be connected to the main antagonist is a heavy-handed way to show the adversity, but it works. They didn't really explore how growing up without some of your parents really affected the world outlook of Isaac and company, but it builds a bond between them that plays out in situations later in the story. The introduction of Satoru and Minardi as the main villains was very well done, established a clear good versus evil dynamic that was compelling for a 12-year-old me. I'd say the overall story was pretty cheesy and overly cheerful like most RPGs, but that comes with the genre. Yeah, I've talked about genre and stereotypes before. Optional skip would have made it perfect. Now it's just a hassle. Much of the Jenna, Garrett, Felix conflict is established before leaving Vale. Without it and without Kraden at your side, there would be very little motivation or guidance for Isaac. Isaac himself lost his father, which influences every conversation he has with his mother again. Was the writing cliché? I don't think so. Expositional maybe, but it sets the tone for the rest of the game, linear and filled with puzzles that bear only one solution. For me, I feel like you get your main story pieces from Vale and from the lighthouses. I think Alex was handled very well throughout the telling story, and if I am to ask for one change in the intro, it would be for the one to acknowledge Alex in the meaningful way, and choose then to cast a spell on Isaac. I would future hope that we see some sort of unusual power from Isaac, perhaps that the seer who teaches Ivan Reveal could realize something was up, but I digress. I like the intro. So overall, people seem to react positively to the opening minutes of the game. However, if you look through those comments, including some I didn't read, you might notice a couple things. People brought up characters such as Kraden or Alex. Who are these people? Well, I think this might have been a miscommunication on my part. When I posted what people thought of the intro, I had a feeling several people thought I was talking about what we just went through, as well as Mount Alph. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's the first dungeon of the game. Thinking about it, I guess I never really considered that part of the game to be part of the intro because the title card is right after the boulder scene, but it appears I may be in the minority here. So you know what? I think this is going to be a two-parter. The second episode might not be as long as this one, but I feel I should cover Mount Alpha a little bit after the responses I got on that Reddit question. After all, it seems a lot of people seem to think of that too when they think of the intro of Golden Sun. This is where I say that if you'd like to see more like this, feel free to like or follow me on social media for more videos like this in the future. And especially this time, I would be interested in reading all of your comments to see what you think of this intro as well. And with that said, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.